Gareth settled into what he assumed to be a long stretch of boring waiting. That said, it could easily be the opposite of boring. That is dangerous and utterly terrifying. And considering the options, he'd take boring with thanks and sun. Still, in times like these, he much prefers to have one of his books to pass the time. Instead, he'd have to content himself with watching the last bits of light disappear from the horizon. Pine trees. They were a very odd kind of plant to him, nearly opposite in his mind to the plant life he was used to. The islands of Whiia were few and far between, but the plant life they supported was smaller in scale on a general level, and their leaves were wide and heavy. Pine trees had an alien spikiness to them, as if daring something to try them. His eyes wandered from tree to ground to fire. All of it made him hold his legs closer to his chest and arms. He scooched a little closer to Penn. Soon enough, the only source of light was the crackling fire, and as if in direct response to his lamentations of boredom, the universe provided. Chirping and cooing came unseen from tree branches. Chittering echoed from deeper into the trees, far too far into the shadows for Gareth to make out a source. The buzzing of insects grew from one or two to a permeating constant noise. No amount of straining eyes brought clarity, and in minutes the sounds were so varied it was nearly cacophonous. The only time the sounds would die down were when a sharp wind took the trees for a few seconds at a time.
Penn?
Snore.
Penn. There are a lot of things around us. A lot of different things all making lots of sounds. Are they?
Sounds is good. Let me know. If everything goes real quiet, bad.
She started snoring again.
All right. We'll do.
His eyes darted around. Sound was good. Silence was bad. Didn't make much sense to him, but he told himself that it would be best to rely on Penn's experience, not that it really helped to calm him. Penn's presence, though, did have a small calming effect. If she could allow herself to fall unconscious, then certainly they were safe. He looked over to her. That barrel of a chest rose and fell in a slow rhythm. He thought of the scars, and his eye went to her leg. Rolled over as she was, he couldn't see the scar on her left arm. He could see her leg, however. The odd modeling pattern was uncomfortably reminiscent of what heat would do to his shell. He couldn't look for too long and quickly shifted his attention back to their surroundings. He occupied himself by trying to mentally catalog all the bird sounds he heard as time passed. An hour or two passed like this, the only really noteworthy event being a slight scare in the form of an owl. The two large, forward-facing eyes glowed in the firelight before it dropped of its high perch and glided away into the dark forest. After another hour, Gareth witnessed what he was really afraid of happening. Penn hadn't moved much as she slept, but now she began shuddering. Her shoulders would jolt and her stomach would seize up. Her breathing also lost the rhythm it had, becoming halting and quick.
Penn?
He considered moving over to her, but Dag's interaction one of the first nights she was aboard the Nebula held him in place. It was as if she were trying to yell but couldn't open her mouth or put any energy behind it. Part of him wanted to try to wake her. If he could pull her out of whatever was happening, then shouldn't he? With that in mind, he started to move towards her but was stopped. Suddenly she thrashed about, inadvertently rolling herself onto her back. He didn't know what to do. Would waking her work? Would it be okay? What if she lashed out? Questions on questions swirled around in his mind, but he noticed she'd gone quite still. The balled-up clothes she used for a pillow had come out from under her head, and now her dirty blonde hair was getting caked with dirt. Gareth was on his knees now, but waited, watching her. After a moment of stillness, a terrible jolt ran through her, and her eyes shot open. Her head whipped around, and she locked eyes with Gareth. She had a furious look over her face, her eyes wide, pupils dilated. Quickly, though, reality came crashing back, and wherever she was previously drained away. Everything passes, and they were left just looking at each other. Gareth was too stunned to move. He didn't know what to say. Penn turned away quickly, heat rushing through her face. She fiddled with the makeshift pillow and laid back down. Her back turned once again. She spoke.
Few more hours and we'll head out.
He had to take a moment to process what she said.
It'll still be dark.
That's fine.
Penna,
He stopped, totally unsure of what to say. He waited a moment, hoping she'd pick up where he left off, but she gave him nothing but silence. Seconds turned to minutes, and the window passed him by. Eventually, he just went back to listening to the sounds around them. He was far too distracted to really put any thought into it, but Penn's silence gave him little else to do. He did note that, at her outburst, the sounds of the surrounding forest had gone quiet for a few moments. A few more hours passed, and Gareth noticed Penelope start to stir. She coughed some to clear her throat and came to a sitting position before stretching a few good pops from her back.
You good to get going?
She asked as she stood.
I'm sure. It's still dark, though. It will be for another hour or so. You could sleep a little longer if you need.
I'm fine.
He considered asking how she slept, but figured stupid questions got stupid answers. Instead, he just watched as she shook out her clothes and threw them on quickly. Rather than wearing her heavier shirt, she elected to tie it around her waist. Then she crouched down and took the helmet full of water they'd boiled.
You need...
She started, but was stopped with an upraised hand.
Not a ton of anything I need, so by all means.
Thanks.
She brought the rim of the helmet to her mouth and tipped it back and back and back. Finally, she let out a heavy, satisfied sigh.
Good shit.
She hooked a warped piece of the helmet into the hanging sleeve of her shirt and tied the sleeve off, securing the helmet.
Rhea.
She stopped, kicked dirt over the last smoldering bits of the fire until it was totally muted, and continued.
Ready, and don't worry, I'm not going to make you run for 10 minutes before picking you up this time. Hop on.
She knelt down again, and Gareth hopped up onto her back. With the shirt tied around her waist, he could now brace his webbed feet against the rolled-up part of the shirt. It didn't totally solve the rough ride, but he'd take it and appreciate it even more as the terrain turned more and more rocky. A short bit of travel passed before Gareth plucked up the courage to say something about the previous night.
Penn, about last night, I don't want to bring up if you don't. I just want to make sure you are...
I'm fine,
she said curtly. Gareth noticed the edge in her tone and lamented somewhat.
but thank you.
If you want to talk...
He was cut off by a hard landing as she dropped down from a ledge. He didn't finish the sentence, and she didn't speak up, but he didn't notice the same cold shoulder she'd given any of them when they'd pushed the topic previously. Just silence and the working rhythm of her movement. They inadvertently kept near to the river as they went. It meandered close at times and quite far at others, but generally they seemed to be heading towards its source. Their trek took them up to the lip of a shallow chasm that cut into the forest, splitting it like an eye. Penn stopped at the edge and looked either way. Both directions would add hours to their journey if they tried to circumvent it. Penn looked back to her traveling companion with a look that did not instill joy.
What are you thinking now?
I'm thinking it'll be faster to just climb down and then back up the other side.
That sounds like a terrible idea.
You think all my ideas are terrible ideas?
That's because they generally are.
She smirked, only half hidden by his position behind her. He didn't fail to notice it, though, and huffed.
I'm starting to think you enjoy terrorizing me.
A little.
That's sick, Penn.
She only chuckled. They both stared down into the chasm.
I can think of 2 plans I'm pretty sure you didn't mind.
Well, I can't exactly complain given my continued life, no, but are you sure, though?
Look, it's an easy climb down and back up. I know I'd be fine, but we can just go around if you aren't comfortable with it.
His hand went to a head frill, same as it always did when he was puzzling something out.
You're more familiar with these waters, so if you're confident, then I trust you.
Penn hid her smile with a turn of her head. She looked down into the chasm and cleared her throat.
Let's get to it, then.
Gareth was jostled as his ride turned and lowered herself over the edge. In short order, she was picking her way from outcropping to ledge, finding a meandering path down to the bottom of the chasm. He'd seen so many feats of strength from her already, but even still, it shocked him as he watched her hold their combined weight. Sometimes it was little more than 1 digit worth of her fingers keeping them from free fall. Her corded muscles flexed as a hand moved from here to there, or a foot found an anchor point. She had a tense focus about her, but not once did she complain. Eventually, he thought to ask her something.
I don't want to distract, but,
She let out a controlled exhale.
Please do, actually.
well, it's just all this activity, especially the running, well, it's insane. I don't know many species that could match your strength, but I don't think I know any who could run for hours straight.
A jog, to be fair, but I understand your point. It's our evolutionary niche, I suppose. Even among Earth predators, I don't think there are many who match our endurance.
Endurance predation.
Gareth said, as if reading from a book. Penn answered as she worked their descent carefully.
I believe that's what it was called, yeah. Science or history weren't really my forte, but apparently when other predators were dropping out of trees or waiting in some other hidden ambush spot, humans would just walk and walk and walk.
Eventually, your prey would just have to lie down and, that is unsettling, to be honest. I was almost surprised that I was able to keep up with you when we first started moving. I didn't quite understand what ton it meant, but I think I'm getting it now.
Do note that, and I'm not trying to brag here, I may be a poor example of the whole, most humans aren't going to be matching me. I've had years of training in terms of both physique and skill set. Your average Joe or Jane's, I mean, I don't want to say they couldn't, but not every human is a guaranteed marathon runner.
The potential is there, but there is a difference between potential and what is ultimately realized.
Yeah, though I must admit, I've had an easier time than many. Not all, but many.
How so?
Simple genetics. I'm bigger than most. I put on muscle and keep it easier than most. I grew up in a place that stressed fitness. Military training could only help. Not that I didn't work for this, mind you.
She exemplified her final point by, with a single hand, extending them out and holding their weight for a moment before pulling back in and continuing downward. Gareth scrambled to hold on as tightly as he could. A few scared clicks escaped his mouth, and he couldn't help but glance down. It was a dizzying sight.
Impressive. Yes, very impressive. But I'd ask you not do that again. I've had my fill of hurtling towards hard, solid surfaces.
Penn laughed.
I had a drop instructor who would always say that it isn't the fall that kills you, just the sudden stop at the end.
I'm quite certain I'd die of fright before I met that sudden stop, which would honestly be a mercy.
She huffed as she made a particularly far reach for a handhold.
You sell yourself short, Gar. You handled the drop well. Better than some cadets I've seen.
You needn't flatter me, Penn. I hold no illusions.
I mean it, I do.
She came to a large jutting ledge just above the floor of the chasm. Stepping off onto the ledge, she sat down with her legs off the side and took a moment to breathe. Then she simply slid right off the side and landed on the floor of the chasm.
Well, thank you then, for the vote of confidence. That said,
They both looked up the imposing climb before them.
I think I'll leave the displays of physical prowess to you.
Heh.
Penn chuckled as she thought about their first few interactions.
What?
I suppose you could say we've had a rocky relationship.
She motioned generally to the area and turned an open-mouthed smile over her shoulder, pearly teeth and all. Gareth sighed.
Sensational, Penn, truly.
Heh. Fine, fine. I'd love a distraction, and if not puns, then how about you tell me more about your people? I don't know much more than what you've told me, and that's limited. I know your home planet has beautiful horizons, and the sun doesn't set. You guys went to war a long while ago with Ossians. Think Tonette mentioned that.
She examined the climb as she spoke. After a moment, she picked a starting point a couple lengths to the left of where they'd hopped down from. Gareth reacted in minor disgust as she spit in her own hands, rubbed them together, and hoisted them up the first ledge.
Yes, the war was quite some time ago, but we teach it in great detail even to this day so that future generations never make the same mistake.
What about before then?
That is the one and only war my people have fought. According to ancient history, there were trade squabbles at the beginnings of violent society, but nothing you'd call a war and a lesson we learned quickly. We deal with our problems like adults, talk and earnest compromise as opposed to tantrums.
Is that how you see us, tantruming children?
Yes and no, I don't mean to insult, but your people do seem to have an unhealthy obsession with violence. The technological advancement necessary for space travel and spaceborne society comes with a technological level sufficient to create horrid means of destruction. The same fusion energy that powers a planet can raise one too. So, it's expected that most peoples that make it this far have learnt not just to not use them, but to view the very idea as pathetic, I guess. It takes an ignorant mind to suggest destruction. Most of the civilized, most of the rest, my apologies, of the galaxy sees violence as something to grow out of.
Penn was silent, prompting him to continue.
I mean, look at you. I would have thought that with everything you've been through, you'd understand better than me.
She swung up to another handhold and secured her footing.
What do you mean, everything I've been through?
I saw you. Or I mean, rather you showed me those injuries last night.
He quickly continued to cover for his close blunder.
And you've mentioned a bit of what happened. Not details, but enough. I would have thought someone like you would have a clear stance on it.
It's not that simple. I fought people who needed to be stopped. They wouldn't have otherwise.
Why? I'd like to continue, but I'm curious. What happened exactly?
Personally, or?
Broadly, what was the reason for all of it?
She hoisted herself up to a secure position and took a moment.
It was a corporate war. Another one, a group that managed mining and other operations in the Kika system thought they should be the ones fully in charge. They ousted the local governments and took over any local forces. They figured that they had enough political swing and paramilitary might to make fighting more of a hassle than it was worth.
But they were wrong.
Not at first, no. They bogged down any bureaucratic response and made it clear that they'd make use of their private military. That and they strangled any data coming in and out of the system. When about a year before enough clear-cut footage of crimes leaked out. Eventually, though, they were declared a rogue entity, and a response was mounted.
Crimes?
Exactly what you think.
I see.
He could see the sentinels. If they were willing to use those, he didn't need much help to imagine what else they were willing to do. She felt the little shake of his head on her back.
Hold on, though. We were talking about your people. Enough about shitty subjects. Tell me about Whiia.
All right. What to say about her? What you mentioned before was true. The surface is one big sea dotted with chains of islands. Most life is aquatic like my people, but there are small and vibrant ecosystems in the forests on large enough islands. Plants quite unlike these pine trees. Their leaves are large and flat like massive blankets.
You know, I'd never given it much thought, but your people have been spacefaring for some time. Were you born on Whiia?
Yes, actually, Whiia is my home planet in both senses of the word. I was born in Oda City to a clutch of 17 brothers and 2 sisters.
Whoa, big family.
On the contrary, it's considered on the smaller side for the average clutch, though 2 daughters in one was a blessing.
Why is that?
Whiians don't differ from humanity as much as Ossians. In fact, on the galactic scale, we're quite similar. Nevertheless, there are some major differences. Population-wise, Whiians sit at about 75% male, 25% female.
Oh.
Also, there's quite a bit of sexual dimorphism. Male and female stand about twice the size as males and possess more arms and an additional pair of ancillary legs. There are also a number of internal differences, but...
Twice your size is almost average human height.
I'm a bad example. I'm considered abnormally tall for a Whiian male. That said, the height difference is striking enough you'll know when you see one. Funnily enough, that lack of obvious difference in humans created some very funny blunders on first contact, for Ossians and Whiians both.
Penn chuckled. She'd heard a few stories of the first contact emissaries constantly mixing up their sirs and ma'ams. As far as she heard, they eventually gave up and avoided using the terms altogether.
Hey everyone, hope you loved the video. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit subscribe for more awesome sci-fi content. You can also support us by hitting the thanks button or becoming a channel member. Your generosity helps us bring you more stellar stories. Every bit counts. Thanks a bunch.